Shane Wright was supposed to be the easiest call in hockey. For almost 2 straight years, he sat at number 1 on every draft board in the sport. Not a projected top 5, number 1. The consensus best player in his entire class. Then, on draft night, 3 teams passed on him. He fell all the way to the Seattle Kraken at 4. 3 years later, hockey fans can't agree on what he actually is. Some people think he's a bust already. Some think he's one trade away from breaking out. And buried in that argument is a stat line that's genuinely hard to explain. A 20-year-old who put up 44 points, then dropped to 27 the very next year. So in this video, we're going to walk through exactly what happened to Shane Wright. The hype, the numbers, and what he's actually good and bad at on the ice, and by the end, we'll land on a real verdict on how good he actually is. Because if the Kraken got this wrong, it might be the most expensive mistake in franchise history. To understand how big a deal Shane Wright's slide actually was, you need to understand how good everyone thought he was going to be. Wright entered his draft year as the presumptive first overall pick, the kind of prospect scouts build entire draft classes around. He held that ranking for the better part of 2 seasons in junior hockey, not just a hot streak. Generational and franchise center were the terms attached to his name well before he was old enough to be drafted. Then, on draft night, Montreal, New Jersey, and Arizona all picked ahead of him, and all 3 passed. The Kraken, picking 4th, thought a player who was supposed to be gone by pick 1. For a franchise that had only existed for 1 season, landing a player who spent 2 years as a consensus number 1 overall felt like a gift. It felt like the easiest win in the franchise's short history. But 3 years later, that gift comes with a stat line that's hard to ignore. In his first full taste of real NHL minutes, at 20 years old, Wright put up 44 points, a promising he's figuring it out kind of season. Very next year, that number dropped to 27. That specific drop matters. It's the difference between a slightly slow burn and being flat out a little busty. A regression like that in your 4th draft anniversary year is exactly the profile of a player who quietly becomes a cap relief trade chip a couple of years down the line. This isn't happening in a vacuum either. Wright went from presumptive first overall to 4th pick to a sophomore slump that undid his 1 good season all inside 3 years. A drop like that doesn't happen to generational talents. It happens to players whose ceiling and floor are still both very much in question, which is exactly the fight playing out online right now. So if it's not just bad luck, what specifically is going wrong on the ice? This is where the breakdown gets genuinely useful. The most repeated criticism isn't about skill at all. It's about assertiveness. Put bluntly, Wright's best stretches come when he's playing with an edge, and outside of those windows, he's usually a passenger. He doesn't drive play, doesn't carry the puck well, and doesn't force turnovers. The exact tools you'd expect from a former first overall center. It's not just about talent either. After 2+ seasons, there's still no sign of arrogance or selfishness. No fight, no fire in his belly. And it's showing up in ice time. Wright's been vocal about wanting a bigger role, reportedly preferring a trade to Vancouver where he'd expect more minutes. But the counter argument is simple. He's not getting more minutes in Seattle because he's not good enough for it yet. He hasn't earned a higher place in the lineup. So the picture that emerges isn't a player without talent, it's a player who hasn't shown he can force his way into a role, even when people are actively rooting for him to. Which brings us to the question that's actually splitting the fan base. Is bust too harsh, or is it exactly right? The bust case is simple. Going from exceptional potential first overall to maybe middle 6 center is, by definition, a bust, even if he ends up being a perfectly useful NHL player. There's precedent for how brutal this gets, too. Seattle landed Kaapo Kakko, another high-profile bust, for next to nothing, which makes it a little ironic that the same front office might value their own bust more highly in a trade. But there's a real optimist case sitting right next to that pessimism. Wright is a prime candidate to explode with a change of scenery. His age fits Vancouver's timeline, and his draft pedigree is exactly the kind of profile that sometimes just needs a new room, a new role, a fresh start to click. Even the skeptical read leaves the door open. Misunderstood doesn't mean he's been bad, just that some people still genuinely believe he could be a star in the making. So the debate isn't really, is he good or bad? It's whether what we've seen so far is the finished product or a talented player who just hasn't found the right environment yet. Strip away the trade rumors and the draft day nostalgia, and here's what's actually true about Shane Wright right now. The weaknesses are specific and repeated across dozens of takes. Limited play driving, inconsistent engagement, and a production drop from 44 points to 27 that's hard to explain away. The strengths are real, too. He's still only in his early 20s. He's already shown he can produce at a respectable level in the league, and the most level-headed read out there is probably this. He is likely to stick as at least a middle 6 center, even in a worst-case outcome. That's the prevailing verdict across the debate. Not a bust in the out-of-the-league sense, but a long way from the alpha franchise center outcome his draft class once promised him. Shane Wright right now is a good enough NHL player and a disappointing former first overall talent at the exact same time. Whether that changes probably depends less on his talent and more on whether he ever finds the assertiveness or the opportunity everyone's still waiting on.